You are listening to a podcast of the Fahey and Shivari Show, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Thursdays, only on SportstownChicago.com.
You're listening to Fahey and Shivari on SportstownChicago.com.
Back here for the Fahey and Shivari Show here on SportstownChicago.com. If you're a regular of our show, just like our next guest is, you know what this music means. It means it's time to bring in our guy, Gabe Salgado, freelance writer. We always talk about all the hot topics with him. It was the Hawks for the last couple weeks, but today, what's trending on Gabe's mind right now is the Spurs-Heat NBA Finals and Colin Kaepernick's new contract extension. Gabe, welcome on in to the show.
Hey, do you guys feel slighted just like LeBron James does?
You know, I like that Timmy Duncan's talking a tough game here. I think it adds more excitement to this time around, especially after what happened last year. How do you feel about the series, though? Do you think this is going to be a better series than last year, Gabe?
Well, I must say that even though LeBron James didn't necessarily agree with the assertion that the Spurs gave them the finals last year, we both know they really made some bad mistakes in that Game 6. This year, I think it's going to go 7 games again. You know, both teams are extremely talented, whether you like them or not. You know, both teams play a completely different brand of basketball that, you know, has led them to be, completely successful. And, you know, you take a look at, the Spurs with their veteran leadership and Miami with their mix of veterans and youth and speed and athleticism. So I think it's going to be another 7-game series again.
In the Western Conference Final, Gabe, in Game 6, when it was the Spurs taking on the Thunder in Oklahoma City, Tony Parker left in the second half with an injury. He says he's good to go for Game 1. How concerned are you, though, however, with the status of Tony Parker and his health?
You know, I'm not too concerned. You know, as we both know, Greg Popovich has a history of resting his starters as much as possible because they're all, at least a good chunk of them are in like their 30s and up, so he wants to keep them fresh, and I think that's what it was here. Maybe, Parker rolled his ankle a little bit, and they just wanted to, keep precaution because, they knew with the finals coming up, they wanted him to be healthy. So I'm not too concerned. Now if he rolls it again, tonight, and, then there's something to worry about. But I think he should be okay, and, Greg Popovich was just doing the smart thing there.
Last year we saw Popovich kind of bench Parker towards the end of Game 6 for offensive possessions favoring Ginobili. It looks like Parker, his health is kind of bothering him. He had left ankle soreness, kind of missed the second half of Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals. Do you kind of foresee that situation kind of playing out again with Ginobili being favored over Parker as like a late scorer, or will we see someone else kind of step up in place of Tony Parker?
Well, that all depends, one, on the health of the ankle, and two, how effective he is. If he's not effective, obviously we could see Ginobili or somebody else out there, but if Parker's healthy and if he's, consistent, I could see them keeping him out there, especially in the situation where they need his effort. So it all depends on his effectiveness and how healthy that ankle is.
When we look at the matchups here between the Spurs and the Heat, obviously the youth is in favor of the Miami Heat. But in particular, I like the small forward competition with LeBron James and defensively sounded Kawhi Leonard. Is that going to be maybe the biggest matchup to look out for in terms of individual performances with these two teams going at it tonight?
I think anybody that has to play defense on LeBron James is the biggest matchup. Just because of the type of player that James is. He's an all-around player. He's not your typical small forward. He can do a little bit of everything. Also, look at who's going to guard Tim Duncan in the paint because, Tim Duncan's relatively unstoppable on the post. And, it's going to be interesting to see, who and how many guys that Miami tries to put on him to contain his numbers.
I haven't. This is an open question for all you guys here. Is Mark Jackson going to be calling the NBA Finals this year?
Yeah, he is. I believe that's what I saw on Twitter.
Your opinions?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Obviously, Mark Jackson had a good rapport with the ESPN and ABC that they brought him back as soon as he was let go from Golden State. Whatever may or may not have happened with him and management in Oakland, Mark Jackson knows his basketball. He was a veteran in the league for a long time, played on a couple of successful teams, so his insight obviously is highly valued.
Are you surprised, though, that he's not searching the coaching market? I know he's not really a candidate for the Knicks job because of Phil Jackson wanted to run the triangle, but are you surprised that Mark Jackson went straight back into broadcasting, and are you excited at what he's going to bring to the table as an analyst for the finals again?
I'm not surprised at all. Obviously you saw how quick the ESPN was to take up the phone and call him and bring him back. Obviously, especially adding to with Mike Breen and Jeff Van Gundy. I think that Jackson adds a little more excitement with his his tempo and his energy when he's got the microphone in his hands. As far as like him going back to coaching, I mean that that all depends. Obviously there's still a couple of coaching jobs out there. Whether or not he's interested in going back to coaching, who knows? Because as we all know, with the type of hours that you got to put in, the demand, and for all we know, he could be burnt out from being in Golden State the last 3 years. Maybe he just wants to take a break and just stay in the broadcast booth where it's less demanding.
I want to stick with the coaching carousel really quickly here before we move on to our next subject. Flip Saunders, president of the Minnesota Timberwolves, hired himself to be the head coach for the said Minnesota Timberwolves. What's your take on a guy who runs the team hires himself to be the head coach? Well, isn't that kind of odd?
And following that up, do you think that this is going to help keep Kevin Love there, or do you think that trade is still probably going to happen?
Well, Flip Saunders, he's coached the Minnesota Timberwolves before, and if I remember correctly, he was the coach when they last made the playoffs. So, obviously he's got experience with the team, and, he's familiar with the fan base. As for, an executive promoting himself as the head coach, we see this in hockey all the time, so it's nothing new to the world of sports. It's rare in basketball, but it's something that has happened in other sports before.
Well, it's happened
as
to
for whether or not that'll keep Kevin Love, that's probably a much more difficult question, because obviously, Kevin Love is frustrated that he feels that his talents are being wasted, and there's other teams out there that can make use of his services.
It's happened to the Timberwolves, too. I want to say Kevin McHale fired Flip Saunders and hired himself to be the replacement. So it just seems like just a rotating carousel of coaches. And
Minnesota problems, that's all I got to say
in
about
Minnesota, where it's, that whoever's going to be their genius executive that probably isn't unfit for the role is just going to end up hiring himself for coach, because that's where he best fits.
Seems to be the nice pattern for Minnesota.
Gabe, let's shift over, though, because you wanted to talk about, well, actually, before we shift over to Colin Kaepernick, your predictions for the series. You said in 7, but I don't think I caught what team you said is winning.
I'm going to go ahead and say the Spurs will, pull it off this time. They realized, the mistakes that they made last year, and, I doubt that they're willing to repeat those mistakes.
Do you think the storyline is going to be Tim Duncan getting that last championship and then retiring in the offseason, or what do you think that the top storyline of that series would be if the Spurs potentially win in 7?
I say the top storyline would be the Spurs found a way to get past LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. I mean, we know that how important those guys were last year, and then also Ray Allen as well, hitting those clutch three-pointers. So it'll be about San Antonio rising above to finally get past the Heat. As for whether or not Tim Duncan will retire, that's hard to say. I mean, everybody's been expecting him to retire for the last few years now, and he keeps coming back, and he's still playing at a high level. He's not as athletic as he used to be, a sign of his age, but he's still effective.
Well, I would just assume that he'd go out on top, but I mean that always brings up the argument of if a guy wins a championship, does he want to retire out on top, or
it'd be his 5th ring if he was to beat the Miami Heat in this upcoming series.
And I think he came back this year because he said as he just said the other week, he had a bad taste in his mouth out of last year's finals that he didn't want to go out like that. So I'm wondering if this is it, if this is like the swan song for Tim Duncan this year.
Here, Gabe, if your prediction stands on Spurs in 7 and they win the NBA title, Tim Duncan gets his 5th ring. Would you see Tim Duncan retire if he wins another title?
Like I said, that's tough to say because he's still an effective player. He doesn't really get injured much, so it all depends at the end of the day how he's feeling.
Gabe Salgado joins us on the Illinois Center for Broadcasting hotline. If interested in a career in broadcasting, go to beonair.com. Let's switch over to Colin Kaepernick and the 49ers. I know Paul mentioned we want to get into that discussion now. He's on the 6-year extension now with the 49ers through the 2020 season. The reported deal is worth $110 million, $61 million guaranteed. Boy, I'm never going to make that much money in my lifetime, I don't think. Gabe, your initial thoughts on Colin Kaepernick getting the most guaranteed money for any NFL contract right now?
Russell Wilson's agent is on the phone with the Seattle Seahawks as we speak, I'm sure. That contract is going to dictate what happens not only with Russell Wilson, but perhaps with Cam Newton and Andrew Luck and a couple of other guys from that draft class as well. I mean, obviously, Colin Kaepernick beat everybody to the big money deal, so all these other players are going to be looking at that, and they're going to be saying, where's my piece of the pie? So this could, dictate the market for, the new contracts that these guys may get.
But, I mean, you definitely bring up a good point with Russell Wilson there. But as far as, like, Cam Newton or Andrew Luck go, wouldn't you think that Kaepernick has the leverage, or at least his deal has the leverage over any of those other guys because he's already been to a Super Bowl in his first year as a starter and then came within a game of the Super Bowl his second year, whereas guys like Newton, Newton's on the rise, Luck is on the rise, but they still haven't really had that conference championship yet to kind of support whatever new deal that they would get?
Exactly. Colin Kaepernick, his performance and his ability to take his team to the postseason the last couple of years definitely played a factor in it. As far as Andrew Luck and Cam Newton go, I mean, they're the faces of their franchises. So I think that, obviously that should be enough to get them at least, some of that fair market value. Russell Wilson, like I said, he led his team to a Super Bowl, the first Super Bowl in the history of that franchise, and you take a look at, for how many years that franchise suffered not being able to get to the postseason, and now they're getting to the postseason constantly, and they finally won the Lombardi Trophy this past season. So I think that, Russell Wilson, he'll probably get a similar deal, if not more. So like I said, his agents are definitely working the phones and trying to see what they can get now.
Yeah, considering that, you're in your the third full season, I believe, that Russell Wilson's been around. You just won a Vince Lombardi Trophy. That's not bad. I think that's pretty good.
That's a guy that not a lot of people expected to be a starter in the NFL, and now he's already a Super Bowl champion.
Is it still, Gabe, as we look at the NFC West now, we just mentioned the Seahawks, Russell Wilson, and then now with the Colin Kaepernick deal, should we be surprised if, for the next 5 years, the road to the Super Bowl goes through Seattle or San Francisco?
That all depends on, how these teams can keep a lot of their core players. You obviously, the salary cap is just a pain in the butt in the NFL. Obviously, there's going to come a point where you can't keep everybody. And, San Francisco players like Vernon Davis is looking for a new deal. And, obviously, Seattle manages to convince their guys to take a discount to some degree like the New England Patriots did for so many years. But, eventually it's going to come to a point, you may have to cut some guys loose and you might not be able to keep everybody. So it all depends on how many of these core players over these last couple of seasons they can keep intact.
Before we let you go, Gabe, as the money would suggest with this contract, is Colin Kaepernick the best quarterback in the NFL? And if not, is he going to be the best quarterback in the NFL when this contract reaches his peak?
I believe that he's one of the best. I think that right now there's no quarterback that stands, clear-cut, ahead of everyone else. Perhaps maybe Peyton Manning just for his accuracy and the type of numbers that he's put up. But from an overall standpoint, Colin Kaepernick is up there, but I think there's a lot of guys up there who are just as good, athletic-wise and ability-wise as he is. But, as far as, will he be the best quarterback of all time, that remains to be seen. That depends on how he performs and if he can live up to the standards of the contract.
Gabe, we appreciate you dropping the knowledge, and you guys can follow Gabe on Twitter at GabeSalgado82. Gabe, we appreciate it. We'll talk with you next week, man. Have a great day.
All right, thanks, guys. You too.
That is Gabe Salgado, freelance writer. As Ryan said, you can follow him on Twitter at GabeSalgado82, GabeSalgado 82.
You're listening to Fahey and Shivari on SportsTownChicago.com.
8:17 from the SportsTownChicago.com studios. We are the Sports Renegades, and right now we're going to jump into the guest line and welcome in freelance writer Gabe Salgado. You can follow him on Twitter at GabeSalgado82. What's going on, Gabe? Enjoying the NBA Finals game?
I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but I must say it looks like it's shaping up to be an interesting summer for the Blackhawks.
Absolutely. Do you see them making like a bigger move, kind of a splash move, or kind of keeping whatever they have and making smaller moves?
Well, I think there's a good chance that they could probably trade some of the, veterans that are taking up some of that salary cap space and maybe get some cap relief, maybe get some younger talent. They're definitely going to infuse a lot of the younger guys next year, such as, Teravainen and a few other guys they got down in developmental. Obviously, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Tate, locking those guys up, obviously, is a high priority. Getting that second-line center, that's also going to be a big thing, too. So, the Blackhawks could do a few things. Plus, the draft is coming up in a few weeks, so we'll see what they do with that. So, they're not going to shift too many pieces around, but they're definitely going to make a few moves here and there and try to make a better run towards the Cup next year. Now, I know we're all disappointed that they lost on Sunday night, but if you think about it, dating back to last season, because the season was so condensed with the strike that they didn't end until almost July, so they had very little time to rest when you consider they won the Cup and spent the rest of the summer basically celebrating. Before you know it, it was back to training camp again, so it'll be nice to, get those guys rested up and healed from any injuries, and just to take their mind off of hockey for a few months and come back stronger next year.
Speaking of the big contracts that you just mentioned, what player do you think is most likely to be traded? We've heard Johnny Oduya, we've heard maybe Marian Hossa. I think that contract's going to be hard to move, but even Patrick Sharp too. Which one of these guys do you see most likely possibly getting traded?
Oduya is probably most likely a guy that they'll move. Marian Hossa does too much offensively for this team, and Patrick Sharp is one of the guys, that brings the identity to this team. So I think Johnny Oduya is one that they could definitely move. Also, maybe they would decide not to bring back Michael Handzus. Maybe he retires. So those could probably be some very likely scenarios that play out there. Again, as far as, getting Kane and Taves locked up, the biggest thing is to lock them up to where you still have cap room to pay some of the other guys, like the younger guys that you want to bring on board. But, Johnny Oduya is as good as he's been. Obviously, he makes quite a bit of money, and, the Blackhawks need a little more cap flexibility, so I would not be surprised if they moved him.
Now, Gabe, do you think they'll re-sign Sheldon Brookbank?
That's another tough one because he also, made a little bit of money this year. So, it depends on how much he's asking for and whether or not he's willing to take a hometown discount to make room for some of the other guys on the roster. Obviously, Brookbank, another one of those core guys on those Cup teams, and I think that, I think that it'd be good to have him around, but it all depends on how much it's going to cost to do so.
Do you think the defense is going to get shaken up more rather than the offense? And by meaning that, do you think we could see some guys from the minors like Klaus Dahlbeck or Adam Clendenning get called up and get a shot this year?
It wouldn't surprise me. I don't think that it's something that, they're going to totally shake up the defense and, just completely move everybody around, but it's definitely something that they'll look at. I think the overall bigger concern is getting that second line center and, getting a lot of the younger guys a chance to come in and earn their NHL stripes. But, again, wouldn't put it past him. Obviously Stan Bowman, he always has, things that he wants to do. He probably has, a clipboard or something where he has everything sorted out as to what he wants to do, but I definitely wouldn't rule it out. Any
trade candidate or free agent on any other team that, kind of intrigues you and you think can, help the Hawks?
That's a tough one to call because, any guy that they could bring in, commands a lot of money. And,
right.
That would be the biggest issue is do they want to take on, those type of contracts when they're trying to, get other players in and, especially, wanting to sign, Kane and Taves. So it all depends on, what the market is out there because obviously if, they have their whole cap tied up in just a couple of players, it's going to defeat the whole purpose of what they're trying to do.
Do you see David Rundblad making an impact with the team this coming season?
I definitely think he's going to get a shot. I know that, there's been some talk about him. He's been down in the minors doing his thing. I definitely think he'll get a shot in training camp. If he'll make the regular season roster, that remains to be seen. I think Tara Vinen probably has a better shot of getting on the regular season roster next year, but, you're definitely going to get a good look at a lot of these younger guys once camp opens.
And then, so we know Ranta's got that his deal's expired. Do you foresee the Hawks re-signing him and just keeping him the backup behind Crawford? Do you see them trying to do what they did last year and pick up a guy like Nikolai Khabibulin, who we all know didn't really work out too well?
I mean, obviously the Blackhawks probably aren't going to blame Khabibulin. I mean, he really didn't play last year. He got hurt and we never saw him again. As for Antti Ranta, they're high on his development and they think he has potential. So perhaps maybe they could keep him around unless they find somebody else that they think is better for the job. The only issue with that, again, would be how much money would they want. As you could, last year when they let go of Ray Emery, it was because of the type of money he was going to be seeking, and he ended up going to Philadelphia where he had a better chance of being a starter and could get that money he was looking for. So obviously, if they were to bring back Ranta, it would have to be at their price and not his.
Speaking of money, what kind of money do you think Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves will be offered, and what kind of money do you think they're seeking per year?
Oh, they'll definitely get, the $9 to $10 million per year range. I mean, obviously, you take a look at what they've accomplished with this team and, everything that, they've done as individuals, as players, and how they've really blossomed since they first came to Chicago from the minors. So obviously, those are the cornerstones of your team. Those are the guys you want to build the team around, especially since, they're still a winning team. Obviously, they've only won 2 Stanley Cups under Joel Quenneville, but they're in the playoffs every year, and they're always in the thick of things. So, but definitely those guys will probably get around, $9 to $10 million per year for sure.
And then is there any scenario with you that you could see either of them leaving?
It would take an awful lot for, them to let go of those two guys. I mean, just what they mean to this team and how they've restored the pride and the identity that they've given this franchise. It would take something drastic to happen to see either one of them leave. I mean, obviously they could probably go anywhere and get, 10 times the money they're making now, but, there's no guarantee that they'll play for a winning team like they have here.
Now we know the LA Kings ousted the Hawks in Game 7, and they got the winner last night against the Rangers in overtime. Do you see the Kings just taking it to the Rangers and making this a quick final?
I know they had that big overtime win last night, but don't count out the New York Rangers. They're a scrappy team, they're a gritty team, and they're a team that's going to fight every night. And you saw what they did, how they eliminated Pittsburgh, how they kept Montreal at bay. The series is far from over. I will not be surprised if it goes 7 games, and it's definitely going to get interesting once things shift back to New York.
And can you foresee this kind of the semifinal for when the Hawks took on the Kings for the next coming years?
If the Blackhawks still have a competitive roster, and if the Kings can keep their roster intact, it wouldn't surprise me. It's unfortunate that, how well the Kings have done over the last couple of years, and they get very little fan support. Right now it's a lot of bandwagon fans, a lot of fair-weather fans that are going out to the Staples Center over the last few weeks, and it's just unfortunate because they really do have a talented team.
Now, the Blackhawks, really right now, they've got a great team, except what do you think maybe in all, between offense, the defense, the goaltending, and the special teams, do you think is maybe the main scapegoat for them not making it to the Stanley Cup Finals? Obviously, they were just one bad bounce of a goal away.
Corey Crawford took a lot of heat this year, and the thing to understand is the Blackhawks didn't have their best foot forward on defense, and they weren't deflecting shots, they weren't clearing pucks, they weren't rebounding well, and also they struggled in their power play as well. So those are probably the two biggest factors, but, it's just unfortunate that a lot of the blame has gone on Crawford, but at the same time, when he has nothing but opposing forwards camped out in front of the net and no defense, to help him out, obviously he's not going to make every save. So, he kind of became the scapegoat, and then the bad power play and the penalty kill added to it. So I think those are definitely two areas where the Blackhawks are going to work to improve, aside from, roster changes and things like that.
Gabe, you mentioned the opposing forwards camping out in front of Crawford. Do you think a big physical presence defenseman is needed for the Blackhawks, or do you think the speed and finesse is enough for the defensive core?
No, I wouldn't mind seeing, another physical guy on defense, somebody that's not afraid to push those forwards around. Remember when Dustin Buffalo was here, that was his job. His job was to knock around those forwards trying to, park in front of the net. And I think the Blackhawks definitely need another guy like that. If they don't bring him back, obviously, I don't think they would. But, a guy like that that's similar, that, is not afraid to get his hands dirty and not afraid to risk getting a penalty for the sake of, making sure nobody gets one past Crawford. I definitely think that's something they should look into.
Going back to Crawford, do you believe that if the Hawks would have won the Stanley Cup this year, that a lot of the heat that he took all year long, especially this year and last year, would have gone away and he would have just been heralded for his efforts?
Definitely. Obviously, winning cures everything that ails you, and especially if you win championships, that's obviously a big thing. But, unfortunately, this is a situation they're in now. Crawford, a lot of shots went past him, a lot of key goals went past him, and right now, a lot of people are blaming him, but obviously it's a team game, and, there was things wrong, more than just him that really hurt this team this year. But definitely if the Blackhawks would have won it again this year, I think they probably would have, given them a pass on that.
So for the offseason, what do you expect the first move to that the Hawks will make?
Secure Taves and Kane. That's going to be first and foremost on Stan Bowman's priority list. They definitely want to lock those guys up and know that you got your cornerstone, so then you can focus on putting the other pieces in place. That'll definitely be the first thing that the Hawks do.
And then do you? I mean, I know the NHL draft's a bit of a way here, but do you see the Hawks going for more offensive depth or defensive depth in the draft?
I could see them going a little bit of both. Obviously, the Blackhawks, they pride themselves on, developing young players on both sides of the ice, and I definitely think that they'll probably look to either or. It all depends on the best player that's available by the time they pick.
And then finally, before we let you go, Gabe, What are you expecting? Are you expecting big moves this summer, or are you just going to think the Hawks are going to re-sign Kane and Tays and then just kind of use the rest of the money to fill in?
Aside from re-signing the top guys, I think that they'll make just enough moves to improve in the areas where they struggle. I don't see anything too drastic, But then again, it's the NHL, it's sports, anything can happen. But I think the Blackhawks will do just enough to get the team over the hump again next year.
All right, Gabe, we really appreciate you coming on our show and talking to us about the Blackhawks off-season.
All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Have a good night. That was Gabe Salgado, independent freelance writer, coming on our show at SportsTownChicago.com.
Chris Hornig here from the Sports Renegades, reminding you to listen to us every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. on SportsTownChicago.com as we discuss all Chicago sports as well as national. That's right, Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. on SportsTownChicago.com.
You are listening to a podcast of the Fahey and Shivari Show, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Thursdays, only on SportsTownChicago.com.
Back here at the SportsTownChicago.com studios here in Lombard, Illinois. It is 1:38 in the p.m., and if you know this music, what that means, it's time to bring in Gabe Salgado, our guy. This week we're talking a little bit about the Stanley Cup Finals as well as the Cubs and the Sox first-round draft picks. Many exciting things to kind of dive into. Gabe Salgado, welcome into the show.
Hey, guys. Good being with you as always.
All right, so last night, Henrik Lundqvist almost single-handedly won this game for the Rangers, getting 40 saves. I mean, I know he doesn't score any goals, but gosh, this poor guy doesn't get a lot of offensive help from his team, and this is kind of what we were expecting for in the series. Do you think Lundqvist has a shutout or another win left in him before the series is over? Or do you anticipate the Kings wrapping this up on Friday night?
At this point, it's really too tough to call, and if you think about it, it was a showdown between both goalies last night. The Rangers just happened to get one more shot than the Kings did to win the game. I mean, Lundqvist, obviously, those first two games in L.A., he had a rough time, especially since he wasn't getting the offensive support he needed. And as we talked about throughout the playoffs, the Rangers weren't exactly the best offensive team. They weren't exactly the best defensive team. They were a team that did just enough to win and did all the right things at the right time. And right now, that's kind of like sort of caught up with them if you think about it. So obviously, obviously the Rangers still have a lot to work on both ends of the floor. And, last night, Lundqvist showed why he's one of the best goalies in the league, and it was enough to stave off elimination for one more day.
Gabe, the shots on goal total in the third period was heavily in favor of the Los Angeles Kings, 15-1 in their favor. It seemed like in that third period, Gabe, that it was the Kings series to just take over and win and finally get the cup. What does it say about the Kings going into Game 5? Is it just because they had so many shots on goal, it was just Lundqvist played better? Or is it that the Kings still didn't have enough opportunities to get through Henrik Lundqvist?
I definitely have to say Lundqvist played better, because if you take a look at the previous series that the Kings have played in, especially against the Blackhawks, they're very aggressive on offense. They take shots every chance they get. They're not afraid to take shots, and that's how they were able to eliminate the Blackhawks in Game 7. And, obviously, Lundqvist, he just, held his ground and finally decided that, if his team's going to win, he's going to have to take it upon himself to do it. The 2 goals was all they were able to get, and then obviously that's all they needed. So, it's more a tribute to Lundqvist than it is to anything else.
Looking at these two teams, the Kings seem like the more physical team and has been able to kind of control the Rangers. But realistically, with the first 2 games going to overtime and going to the Kings, we could be right now talking about a Rangers 3-1 series lead. What's worked so far for the New York Rangers in this series?
Well, obviously Lundqvist has been, the heart and soul. He's done everything that he possibly could. You take a look at the first 2 games, how, the Kings' offense just seems to be unstoppable. I mean, kind of like how at times they looked against the Blackhawks where they were just skating past everybody, and that seems to be the case here against the Rangers. And obviously their defense has done just enough, and obviously having Jonathan Quick on your team, always gives you a chance of winning. So, at this point it's just about the Kings having slightly more talent. And then, of course, the Rangers just not, being able to elevate their game to that next level is why the series is 3-1 Kings as opposed to the Rangers.
Freelance writer Gabe Salgado is with us on the Fahey and Shivari Show. He joins us on the Illinois Center for Broadcasting hotline. If interested in a career in broadcasting, go to beonair.com. Gabe, going into last night, Daniel Carcillo, the Rangers winger, a former Blackhawk, was eligible to play last night off of the 6-game suspension he had for the elbowing attack he had in the Eastern Conference Final towards the end of that series. Alain Vigneault, the head coach of the Rangers, decides to not play Daniel Carcillo. Good move or bad move on Vigneault's part?
I mean, really, at this point, I don't even think it actually matters because, how many times have we seen Daniel Carcillo, especially when he was in a Blackhawks uniform, go out there in the ice and do absolutely nothing. I mean, Carcillo, obviously he left the Blackhawks somewhat in a bad way. He had the injury, sat out, didn't really play a whole lot of games, did a lot of trash talking while he was injured. Daniel Carcillo, not exactly somebody that I'd prefer to have on my team, so really it didn't make much of a difference.
One of the things that surprised me last night is hits given was in favor of the Rangers, and the Kings have been the team that's been kind of hitting more. Do you think it's that physical style of play that helped the Rangers at least keep the scoring low for the Kings?
They definitely needed to elevate their game in that area, especially since they're, trying to stave off elimination, and obviously it was a big help last night. If they can do it again in Game 5 and this time maybe get a few more goals and, find a way to, to do better defensive support in front of Lundqvist, I think, it can help them take Game 5 as well, but that's definitely an area where they needed to elevate their game, and they did that last night.
Game 5 tomorrow night out in Los Angeles, Kings, Rangers. Puck drop in Los Angeles time. It'll actually be 5 o'clock, so they'll be having dinner and watching hockey. Gabe, it seems like the way this is setting up for the Kings, Friday night would be the night for them to clinch the cup, wouldn't it?
It seems like that, especially since considering the last time they won the cup 2 years ago, they also clinched it at home. So I think that would be an ideal situation with them, but that all depends on whether or not, the Rangers can dig down deep again like they did last night and kind of play spoiler there. But if not, and if the Kings can continue to be aggressive and they can continue to dominate on both ends of the floor, they'll definitely take the cup home again.
I know we didn't talk about this before, but I know you've been covering the NBA Finals, and I wanted to get your thoughts with Game 4 tonight in Miami. Is there any way whatsoever you could see the Spurs taking this game tonight and having a 3-1 lead heading back to San Antonio?
If they continue to play the way that they did the other night, definitely. I mean, obviously, you take a look at they managed to, hold it down on defense. They limited James. They limited Wade. They got really good performances from Kawhi Leonard. From Bellinelli, Ginobili, Duncan, of course. So if they can continue to put together an effort like that, they can definitely take a 3-1 series lead. And the only thing is, Game 5 would be in Miami on Sunday, so that would kind of be hard to kind of pull the sweep there. But I definitely think if they can continue to play the way they did Tuesday, they can increase their lead tonight. As
of right now, as you just mentioned, the Spurs have the 2-1 series lead. Kawhi Leonard had the major performance in Game 3 with the career-high 29 points. As of right now, where it stands with the Spurs leading the series 2-1, Gabe, is this the Spurs for them to win, or for the Spurs to lose it, or for the Heat to win it?
Definitely for the Spurs to lose it. I mean, you just take a look at, the 2 games that they won. You take a look at how dominant they were on defense. You take a look at how efficient they were on offense. Again, the Spurs they're not a run-and-gun team. They're not a high three-point shooting team. They just do everything right from a fundamental standpoint, and that's what's gotten them by the last few years.
I want to transition it now to the other topic you wanted to talk about, and that was the Cubs and Sox draft picks, particularly their first-round draft picks, and they drafted 3 and 4, respectively, White Sox and then Cubs. The White Sox, I think, had Tyler Kolek on their radar. Couldn't scoop him up because he ended up with the Miami Marlins at number 2, but they end up with a really good pitcher in Carlos Rodon. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on Rodon and kind of how funny it is that his teammate Brett Austin was also drafted, his catcher, in the 4th round, who's also signed with the Sox by now, and Rodon's still trying to work out his deal with the Sox. Tell me your thoughts on Rodon and your thoughts on if they can get this deal done with Scott Boras as his agent.
I hope so, because you take a look at the Cubs, they've already signed their first-round draft pick, and the thing about the Cubs and Sox first-round picks this year, they're probably the most Major League-ready players that were in this year's draft, guys that could be brought up fairly quickly. Rodon, obviously probably the second or third best pitcher in the draft, and he just happened to fell in the Sox lap. And what the Cubs have, can't remember his name, but they drafted him out of Indiana. He could play catcher, he could play outfield, and he's a left-handed bat who can hit for power when need be. And obviously, when you've got a guy who can play multiple positions and can bat from the left-hand side of the plate, obviously that's always a big plus. And both of those players, obviously are guys that are capable of coming up to the major leagues very quickly, and especially when you take a look at what the Cubs are trying to do, rebuild with younger talent, and the White Sox are obviously trying to, keep their solid pitching staff intact, because that's so far been their strength to some degree, especially throughout their farm system with their pitching. I think maybe the Cubs should have tried to get a pitcher as well in the first round, considering that was their need, but at the same time, you never want to pass up on an opportunity to a guy who can make his way to the major leagues quickly and make an impact.
Let's say pending agreements to terms with the White Sox, that they signed their first-round draft pick, Carlos Rodon, to a deal. As long as he's signed, based on what you've seen, Gabe, how long do you think it'll take Carlos Rodon to make it to the White Sox Major League Ball Club?
I don't think he'll make it as quickly as Chris Sale did, which is what a lot of people are comparing him to. But I definitely think probably by May or June of next year, depending on when he signs and how quickly he progresses. Obviously, he's going to start in the rookie league, and maybe if he continues to perform well, and if he gets in sooner rather than later, he could probably work his way up to Double-A by the end of the year and start next year in Triple-A. So I definitely think it could happen very quickly for him if he signs within a reasonable time frame and plays his cards right.
Is this a guy that is going to be capable of complementing a 1-2 punch with Chris Sale?
I definitely think so. I mean, you take a look at, how hard he can throw the fastball. He's got a very speedy curveball, which, not many pitchers have, and, just his ability to gather strikeouts and, put the ball in play and force ground outs as opposed to just giving up a lot of hits. He does a lot of things right, and that's what helped get him by through college.
Switching over to the north side now with the Cubs, they signed their first-round pick, Kyle Schwarber, out of Indiana, which the total deal was worth $3.125 million for the entire deal for Kyle Schwarber. In his final year at Indiana, he hit .358 batting average, 14 home runs, 48 RBIs, pretty good for a collegiate player at the end of his collegiate career. As you mentioned, Gabe, that the first priority that we kind of thought was that maybe the Cubs should try to go after a pitcher, but to go after a guy like Kyle Schwarber, who seems to have a pretty good bat. He's won the 3 finals for the Johnny Bench Award given to the top catcher in college. For a guy like Kyle Schwarber, who seems to have a pretty big bat, does it seem like he'll develop kind of quickly, kind of like the Chris Bryant and Javier Baez's of the world for the Cubs?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, obviously, considering that, the Cubs grabbed him right away as soon as they had the chance and signed him quickly, obviously they have high hopes that he could probably progress like Brian Baez and some of those other guys have. So he's already reporting to the rookie league, I should say, and obviously he's gonna have to keep working his way up, and like I said, if you take a look at how fast Chris Bryant has progressed, the Cubs are hoping to get the same thing out of Schwarber.
Jesse Rogers from ESPN speculates that he might not play catcher in the pros. Do you think that could kind of clog things up for him with the Cubs having so many infield and outfield prospects that are ready to come up here soon?
That probably could. I mean, you take a look, just the catchers they have in the Major League roster alone, and they have a few down in the farm system as well. I think that obviously what's going to have to happen is they're going to have to figure out where he fits in best. I think they're clogged at both positions if you think about it. So it's obviously where he fits in best, and obviously him being a left-handed hitter and a left-handed power hitter at that could give him a slight advantage. But I think maybe we should probably wait till he gets to Double-A before we can start, speculating on where he fits in and how long it'll take him to get to the Major League roster. But I think he'll progress very quickly.
Gabe Salgado with us on the Illinois Center for Broadcasting Hotline. He joins us on the Fahey and Shavario show here on SportsTownChicago.com. You guys can follow Gabe on Twitter at GabeSalgado82. Gabe, we appreciate the knowledge you drop in on us every Thursday. We'll talk with you next week, my man. Have a great day.
All right, guys, really quick, and I just want to let you guys know that next Friday, June 20th, you guys can catch me on Sports Talk Live, courtesy of Comcast Sportsnet, so you guys can check me out over there as well, talking some Chicago sports with David Kaplan and those guys. So that should be a good time. But just want to let you guys know to check that out if you get the chance. And thank you guys as always. You guys having me on every week, I think, kind of helped me to some degree. So I definitely appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you guys next week.
All right, congratulations, Gabe. I will definitely be looking forward to that next Friday. Thanks again, Gabe, and everybody out there, take notes on that. Thanks, Gabe.
All right, thanks, guys.
You're listening to Fahey and Shivari on SportsTownChicago.com.